The key was in my hand, but the lock didn't recognize it anymore. I stood on the front porch of the house I had lived in for 31 years. The house where my wife Carol and I raised our son Neil. The house where I built a workshop in the garage with my own hands, where I planted a maple tree in the backyard the year my grandson Danny was born. I turned the key again, slowly, the way you do when you think maybe you just did it wrong the first time. The deadbolt didn't move. The handle wouldn't turn. I stepped back and looked at the house the way a stranger would. New welcome mat, freshly painted shutters in a color I never chose. A small camera mounted above the doorframe that I never installed. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I already knew who it was calling. I let it ring. My name is Leonard Ashford. I'm 67 years old. I spent 38 years as a civil engineer and project manager right here in Columbus, Ohio. The kind of work where if you miss a detail, things fall apart. Literally, I know how to read a document. I know how to find the flaw in a structure before it becomes a disaster. And I know how people hide things in plain sight because I spent my entire career making sure they didn't get away with it on my watch. My daughter-in-law Peggy is 35. She married my son Neil 9 years ago. She sells residential real estate, and she is very good at it. She knows how to read a room. She knows how to find the soft spot in a person and press on it gently until she gets what she wants. She makes it feel like she is doing you a favor the whole time. I didn't see that clearly until it was almost too late, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Carol died 2 years ago, pancreatic cancer. We had 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end, 40 years of marriage, and then she was gone and the house went very quiet. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that part. It still costs me something to talk about it. This story is not really about grief. It is about what grief does to your guard and what certain people choose to do when they notice your guard is down. Peggy was attentive after Carol passed. I want to be fair about that. She called regularly. She brought meals over. She drove me to doctor appointments without being asked. Neil was around too, but Peggy was the one who took charge of things. At the time, I thought I was lucky. I thought we were one of those families that pulls together when things get hard. A lot of families fall apart. We didn't, or so I believed. Then Peggy started talking about the house, not directly. Peggy never comes at anything directly. She circles it first, brings it up sideways between other things, drops it into the conversation and lets it sit there while you talk about something else, then comes back a little closer the next time. I had watched her do that with clients at dinner parties over the years and always thought it was impressive. I found it considerably less impressive when I realized she had been doing it to me. It started with concern. That is always how it starts with people like Peggy. Leonard, this place is a lot to maintain on your own, don't you think? I told her I managed fine, but the yard, the stairs. What if something happens and nobody's around? I told her that if something happened, I would call 901 like any other person. She smiled at that. I just worry. We both do. There are some really nice communities nearby, you know? You'd have people around, activities, support if you ever needed it. I told her I was 65 years old and I did not need a community. She nodded and moved on to something else, but she always came back to it. Sometimes it was practical. The property taxes, the cost of upkeep, the fact that the house had appreciated to around $2 million and I was sitting on an asset that isn't working for me. Sometimes it was about health. A story about a neighbor's father who slipped on ice and spent 2 months in rehab. A forwarded article about aging in place versus assisted living communities. Once after a routine knee procedure, she came to the hospital with Neil and my grandson Danny and sat across from me in the recovery room with an expression I can only describe as calculated sympathy, and told me that moments like that were a reminder that we all needed to think seriously about the future. I remember looking at Danny playing with a toy truck on the floor next to her chair and thinking that I was very tired of thinking about the future in the way Peggy wanted me to think about it. But I didn't say that. I just nodded and said I'd give it some thought. That was a mistake. Not the nodding, the letting her think I was softening. Because Peggy read that as an opening, and she started moving through it before I even realized the door was open. About 6 months after Carol passed, Peggy started showing up with paperwork. The first time it was nothing serious. A form for updating my home insurance beneficiary. She said her real estate contacts had flagged it as something I should take care of. Made sense. I signed it. The second time was a healthcare proxy update. Again, reasonable. I was 65, living alone. Having that in order was smart. By the third time, I had stopped reading as carefully as I should have. That is the thing about trust. When someone has handed you 3 harmless documents in a row, your brain starts treating the fourth one like it is probably harmless too. Peggy understood that. I think she planned for it. The fourth document came on a Tuesday evening in October. She stopped by after dinner, said she had been talking to her accountant about estate planning strategies for older clients, said there was a simple authorization form that would make things smoother for the family if anything ever happened to me. She set it on the kitchen table, walked me through it quickly, answered 2 questions I asked, and I signed it. I trusted her. She was Neil's wife. She had been sitting at my kitchen table for 9 years. She had held Carol's hand in the hospital. I signed it. What I did not fully understand until 5 months later was what I had actually signed. I was updating my files one afternoon in March, the kind of thing I do every year as habit left over from my engineering days when I pulled out that document and read it again. Slowly this time, the way I read contracts at work, not the way I had read it that evening at the kitchen table with Peggy sitting across from me. The scope was not what she described, not even close. It was not a full power of attorney. But there were clauses buried in the language that gave her authority over financial decisions I had never intended to give anyone authority over. The kind of language that, in the right hands with the right follow-through, could be used to move property. I sat at that table for a long time. I want to tell you what that moment feels like when you realize that someone has been working around you. It is not anger, not at first. It is something quieter. It is going back through every conversation, every favor, every Sunday dinner, and running it through a different filter. Everything comes out looking different on the other side. The meals she brought over, the rides to the doctor, the concerned look in the hospital recovery room. All of it takes on a different shape when you look at it again. I did not call Peggy. I did not call Neil either. I called my attorney. Gloria Tanner has handled my legal affairs for 18 years. She is methodical and unsentimental, and she does not waste words. I drove to her office the next morning with the document and everything else I could find that seemed connected. I spread it across her desk and told her what I suspected. She read everything carefully. She asked me several questions. Then she leaned back in her chair and looked at me. "Leonard," she said, "what you have here is concerning, but it is not yet conclusive. If you go to Peggy right now and tell her you know she knows you're watching, documents disappear, stories change. You will not be able to prove what you believe happened." I asked her what she thought I should do. "Proceed as though you don't know anything," she said. "Give her no reason to think the situation has changed, and spend the next few months making sure that when you do act, there's nothing left to argue about." That is exactly the kind of lawyer Gloria is. Over the next 3 months, we worked quietly. Gloria helped me revoke the authorization Peggy had and replace it with a properly structured document that gave Peggy nothing at all. But here's the important part. The replacement document looked almost identical to the original. Same general format, same kind of language on the surface. We did this carefully and without announcing it. As far as Peggy knew, that original authorization was still sitting in my files, still valid, still giving her the access she thought she had. She had no idea she was now holding a document with no teeth. I also had a professional security system installed. Cameras at every entrance, with footage backed up in real time to a cloud server in Cleveland. When Peggy noticed the new cameras on her next visit and asked about them, I told her there had been a break-in 2 streets over, and I wanted some peace of mind. She nodded and said that was a smart move. It was a smart move, just not for the reason I gave her. Meanwhile, I kept paying attention to everything Peggy said. The way she had always circled things, the way she brought subjects up sideways. She mentioned once in a very casual tone that she had a colleague who specialized in what she called private real estate transactions, discrete arrangements for families managing complex situations. I nodded like I found that mildly interesting and stored it away. She also asked once whether I had updated my will since Carol died. I told her I was working on it with Gloria, which was true. She seemed satisfied with that. What she did not know was what else Gloria and I had been working on at the same time. Gloria called me on a Tuesday morning in May. She had been making some quiet inquiries through channels she preferred not to describe in detail over the phone. She asked me to come in that afternoon. I sat across from her desk, and she slid a single printed page toward me. Peggy had been in contact with a residential real estate specialist, not her usual network. A different attorney, someone who handled private transfers. There was paperwork in motion, not yet filed, not yet complete, but it was moving. The authorization I had signed the previous fall, the one Peggy still believed was valid, had been used to initiate a transfer of my property. I looked at that page for a long moment. Then I looked up at Gloria. "How long do we have?" I asked. "Weeks," she said. "Maybe a couple of months if we're lucky." "Then let's finish setting the trap." Here's what Peggy did not know at that point. She did not know the authorization had already been revoked and replaced with a document that gave her nothing. She did not know that 3 weeks earlier, Gloria and I had quietly transferred the property into a trust, which meant the title she believed she was working with no longer existed in the form she thought it did. She did not know that my cameras were recording every entry and exit and backing up to a server in Cleveland in real time. And she did not know about the Airbnb listing. About 2 weeks after I met with Gloria in May, I was checking my email and found a booking confirmation in my inbox. a platform confirmation for a short-term rental, my home address, my property, photos of my living room, my kitchen, my backyard with the maple tree visible in the corner, listed under an account I had never created for dates 3 weeks out when Peggy would have had reason to believe I would be traveling. I forwarded it to Gloria without a word. She called me within the hour. "That is the move," she said. "She is planning to rent the house while you are away. Possibly to buy time, possibly to generate income she can claim as part of an arrangement. Either way, it is aggressive, and it is exactly what we needed her to do." I asked Gloria what she recommended. "We give her the trip she has been waiting for," she said. "You go somewhere, you tell her about it casually. You make it sound like you will be gone long enough for her to feel comfortable moving. And while you are gone, we let her walk right into it." The trip to Denver was Gloria's idea from the start. My old friend Earl Pemberton, a retired school principal who had known Carol for years and who knew the full situation, agreed to have me stay with him. I booked a flight on a Sunday. Called Neil that evening, mentioned the trip the way you mention any normal thing. Told him I was going to an engineering conference and would be gone 5 days. He passed it along to Peggy, which is exactly what I expected him to do. I also told Peggy when she called 2 days later to check in that I had left a spare key with the neighbor next door in case anything came up while I was away. I had not left a key with anyone, but Peggy had no way of knowing that. What I did not fully understand at the time was what was happening inside that house between Neil and Peggy. I found out later, after everything was over, that Neil had started asking questions. He had seen some paperwork on Peggy's desk. He had noticed the Airbnb listing by accident when she left her laptop open. He had asked her what it was, and she told him it was a test listing for a client property. He did not fully believe her, but he also did not know what to do with what he was seeing. Neil has always been like that. He is not a dishonest person. He is just the kind of person who wants to believe that the people he loves are not capable of what they are clearly doing. I know that feeling. I had it too for a while. I flew out on a Sunday. Earl picked me up from the airport and we sat on his back porch that evening drinking coffee, and I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always appreciated about Earl. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "She really thought you wouldn't figure it out. She thought I was a 67-year-old widower who trusted his family." I said, "You were a 67-year-old widower who trusted his family," Earl said. I said, "for about 18 months. We left it at that." On Tuesday, 2 days into my trip, Gloria called me at Earl's kitchen table. It was mid-morning. I had just poured a second cup of coffee. "They moved today," she said. I had known it was coming. I had prepared for it and thought through it and told myself I was ready for it. But there is a difference between knowing something is going to happen and hearing that it has happened. I sat very still for a moment before I said anything back. Peggy and Roy Fielding, her colleague from the brokerage, had gone to the house together that morning. A locksmith had been called. My locks had been changed, and they had attempted to file a transfer document through the title office. The document had been rejected. The title they were working from no longer existed in the form they believed. The trust transfer had been completed and registered weeks earlier. Their paperwork referenced a property that legally no longer existed in the form they thought it did. They had changed the locks on a house they did not own and could not transfer. I finished my coffee. I thanked Earl. I called a car to take me to the airport. I flew home Thursday morning. I want to describe standing on that porch because it is the moment I keep coming back to, the new welcome mat. The painted shutters in a color Carol never would have picked. The camera above the door frame that Peggy and Roy had mounted on my house. My key not turning in a lock that had been mine for 31 years. The phone buzzing in my jacket pocket. Peggy calling, ready to deliver some version of a story she had been rehearsing. I let it ring. I stood there a moment longer than I needed to, just to feel the full weight of what had happened and what was about to happen. 31 years of a house, 40 years of a marriage, the maple tree in the backyard. Danny's height marked on the garage wall at age 1, age 2, and age 3 in Carol's handwriting. All of it sitting right there on the other side of a door I could no longer open with my own key. Then I pulled out my phone and sent Gloria a text. 3 words, "File everything now." She had been waiting for exactly that message. I walked around to the back of the house, the back door, the one Peggy had not thought to change the lock on. I let myself in, set my bag down in the kitchen, and put the kettle on. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and waited. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Neil. He sounded different from the way he usually sounds. Quieter, like he had been thinking hard about something for a long time and had finally decided to say it. "Dad," he said, "I need to tell you something." I told him to go ahead. He told me he had figured out more than Peggy realized. He had seen the paperwork on her desk 2 weeks earlier. He had found the Airbnb listing on her laptop. He said he had confronted her about it, and she had an explanation for everything, the way she always did, and he had wanted to believe her because it was easier than not believing her. But when she left for my house that morning with Roy Fielding and came home 2 hours later acting strange and tense, he knew. He said he was sorry. He said he should have called me sooner. I listened to all of it without interrupting him. When he finished, I told him that what he did next was going to matter more than what he had not done before. I told him Gloria had already filed that morning. I told him Peggy should get a criminal attorney before the end of the day, and then I told him something I had been thinking about on the plane ride home. I know you did not plan any of this. I said, I know you got pulled into something and did not know how to get out. That does not make everything fine. But it matters. It is going to matter. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, I'll do whatever you need me to do, Dad. I told him I knew that. Then I told him I would call him later and hung up. I drank my tea. I sat in my kitchen in a house that still had the wrong locks on the front door and waited. Peggy arrived 40 minutes after that. She came in through the front door. She had a key to the new lock, of course. She stepped into the front hallway and came around the corner into the kitchen and stopped when she saw me sitting at the table. She looked at me. She looked at the folder of documents I had placed on the table in front of me. She looked at my face. Whatever she had planned to say, she did not say it. I told her to sit down. She sat. I told her I had been home since that morning. I told her Gloria had filed everything before noon. I told her about the authorization she thought she had and what it actually contained now. I told her about the trust, about the title transfer that had been registered 3 weeks ago, about the filing that had been rejected at the title office, because the property she tried to transfer no longer existed in the form she believed. I told her about the cameras and the server in Cleveland storing 60 days of footage. I did not tell her everything. Gloria had advised me carefully on what to disclose and what to hold back for the proceedings, but I told her enough. Peggy is not a person who falls apart easily. She sat very still across from me and she was quiet. I watched something move across her face. Not guilt, exactly. More like the look of someone who has run a very careful calculation and just realized one of the numbers was wrong the whole time. Leonard, she started. Don't, I said. She closed her mouth. I looked at her for a moment. This woman who had sat at this table for 9 years, who had brought meals after Carol died, who had driven me to appointments and smiled at me in hospital waiting rooms and handed me documents on quiet evenings and told me they were routine. I don't know what you needed badly enough to do this, I said. I don't know if it was debt or something else, or whether you just looked at this house and decided it should be yours before it was yours. The lawyers and the court can figure that part out. That is not my job. She started to say something again. I held up one hand. My job, I said, was to protect what Carol and I built. That is what I did. The legal process took 11 months. I will not walk through all of it because some of it is still difficult to talk about and some of it is genuinely tedious, and the outcome is what matters. Roy Fielding cooperated with investigators early on. In exchange for reduced charges, he provided a detailed account of what had been planned and how far it had progressed. His testimony filled in several gaps that my documentation alone could not have covered. Peggy had been moving toward this for longer than I realized. The Airbnb listing was not the first attempt. There had been earlier conversations with buyers, earlier inquiries about the property that she had never mentioned to me or to Neil. Peggy was charged with fraud and abuse of power of attorney. She did not go to prison. She received a conditional sentence with significant fines, community service, and a period of probation. I want to be clear about that because I think people sometimes assume a story like this is supposed to end with someone behind bars. That was not what I was after. What I wanted was for it to be on the record, permanent and documented, that the attempt had been made and had failed and had consequences. That is what happened. Neil testified on my behalf. He sat in that room and told the truth about what he had seen and when he had seen it and what he had done and not done about it. It was not easy for him. I watched his face while he talked and I could see what it cost him, but he did it. He did not look for a way around it or ask me to make it easier for him. He just did it. That mattered to me more than I expected it to. Neil and I are not where we used to be. I want to be honest about that. There is damage there that is going to take time, and I do not know exactly what our relationship looks like on the other side of all this. But we are talking. He calls on Sundays again. He brought Danny over last month and we worked on a small project in the garage together, the three of us, and for a couple of hours it felt almost like something normal. I will take that. Danny still comes over every other weekend and on holidays. Those are the best days I have now. He is 7 years old and he has his grandmother's eyes and he has absolutely no interest in slowing down for any reason at any time. Last weekend he asked me why there were numbers on the garage wall. I told him those were how tall he was when he was little. He looked at them for a second and then ran back outside. I stood there for a moment looking at Carol's handwriting and then I went back outside too. The house is still mine. The maple tree in the backyard is taller than ever. I had the locks changed back the week after the filing. My locks, my key, the way it had been for 31 years. The locksmith who did it was a young guy who made a comment about the quality of the original hardware and seemed genuinely pleased to be restoring something rather than replacing it. I gave him a good tip. The maple tree is going to be beautiful this fall. I already know it. If you are in your 50s or 60s and someone in your life, someone you trust, starts talking about your home like it is a problem to be managed, pay attention. They will frame it as concern. They will bring paperwork to your kitchen table on a quiet evening and walk you through it quickly and ask you to trust them. And if you have recently lost someone, if your guard is down and the house feels too big and too quiet, they will use that. They will call your home a burden and offer themselves as the solution. Do not let that happen. Trust what you see, not just what you feel. Document everything that seems off, even when you're not sure yet why it seems off. Get a good attorney before you think you need one, so that when the moment comes, you are already in relationship with someone who knows your situation and can move fast. And do not let grief make you careless with what you spent your life building. Because what you built is not just a financial asset, it is the record of your life. It is the maple tree and the handwriting on the garage wall and the key that fits the lock. It is worth protecting, and you are more than capable of protecting it.